So today I'm talking about startup ecosystems, and just to give you some kind of context of how my mind works and how I usually work. I'm a very logical person, so I'm always thinking about processes and scaling and things like that. So whenever I do something, I hate to repeat it in a way that I'm also always thinking of how can we make a process out of it, how can we make this scale and make it more effective. So this leads to also kind of to this speech how I think about developing startup ecosystems. And Grow VC Group is our kind of holding company for these different companies, and the name VC actually comes that it started as the world's first equity crowdfunding platform, and the idea was to create a better venture capital model, so more kind of people or crowdsourcing funding. So the positioning between our activities is that what it has evolved to, most of the companies focus on this digital finance of alternative investing, of whether it's startups, whether it's peer-to-peer lending and so forth. So we work on that field globally. And then the other part of what came from the equity crowdfunding is of course startups and my own history on that side. So this is how the company that is focused, Startup Commons, is kind of in between these two worlds as well. So the other companies provide technology, data and knowledge about digital finance platforms, and Startup Commons provides knowledge, digital platforms and data about startup ecosystems. So if we start with the problem definition of what we started to go after when we think of startup ecosystems, the basic problem was how to really scale entrepreneurship and innovation. And scaling means that I was already doing my own companies. I have succeeded, I have failed, and you always learn more from failures. And I've helped and advised and mentored and built local support services, but none of those, like, you hit your limitations of time. So I was always thinking, how can you create processes and so forth to really help enable successful startups in volume. So why the focus on startup ecosystems? So entrepreneurship and innovation is really the change engine in the society. It's the thing that actually most of the great and big things are done by some entrepreneur, some crazy person who just decides to do things differently and innovate along the way. Also from economic perspective, new companies provide actually most of the growth in a way of creating some new value. And then in different studies, the connectivity that you can build in the network of within the ecosystem is the most important part to actually help scale it. Also, as I said, I'm a person who always looks for avoid random and find the pattern, find the systematic approach. And some very basic observations that only the things that can be understood can be developed. It's a simple thing, but if you don't understand what you're doing, then by definition, how can you develop it? Another part is that only things that can be measured can be improved. So if you're not measuring it, by definition, you are not improving it. Some other things that are key that I came across when we started to venture out more from kind of single region or single country was that there was a lot of confusion about the terminology that is just very casually used, but if you need to be systematic, you need to go into heart of very specific things that are kind of unclear. So a lot of terminology about ideas or inventions are just casually mixed with innovation. And innovation is also a very confusing word in many places because it's used in many ways. So the difference between idea or invention is that it's not validated. It's just a theoretical model of something that you say that I have created a better mousetrap or a better toaster or whatever. And invention is validated, yes, so that it actually is a better mousetrap or it actually is a better toaster. So innovation is a new product or a solution or any type that actually creates new value compared to previous solution, whether that's a product, whether that's a process, or so forth. And by proven, it means that the value can be measured and it can be identified to whom that value is created for. So the customer or the user is identified. Also, a lot of startup is about tech startups and technology, but it's more about innovation. So it's not really about technology is so commonplace. We all use different technology all the time and we don't even think about it. So Uber, for example, is definitely not a technology innovation. It's a service design innovation. And any of the new innovations can be combined by technology, business model, process, and there's different categories. Can be iterative, it can be lateral, taken from here to there, or it can be very disruptive. So innovation is combination of some of these actors, and you can kind of find your way. So another part is the confusion between entrepreneur and entrepreneurship and startups. And startup is by no means a kind of a official term, but it has many meanings. So I'm trying to kind of create some understanding between what is commonly appearing in many places, how it's perceived. So entrepreneur is an individual and startup is an entrepreneurial team. And by team, it's a co-founding team. It's not the one guy as an entrepreneur and then some guys, employees that is paid salaries, but it's someone, a group, a team of people who take responsibility together. So this is some simplifying charts to kind of separate entrepreneurship in general and something that can be called as a startup, as a more scalable, more impactful, choose a term, but something that wants to be bigger. Also, I started to look at one of the problem is that there was one dimension missing about developing startups, and that was the life cycle. It was not very well framed into how because you need some kind of process to be able to measure and develop. So you can't just have a random thing. So this is how usually you can see a lot of startups talk, that it starts from an idea, then you launch, and then you scale. But when you try to build companies like myself and helping others, you really, first problem is that how do you build that team? How do you find those co-founders? How do you actually find that? So this is the key of kind of early services to focus. There's many others, but this is one of the key. The other part is ideation. I saw so many unfortunate entrepreneurs who actually started with really bad ideas. And it's not that there's nothing wrong with that. You need to start from somewhere. But too little is focused on actually identifying a meaningful problem to go after. Because a lot of entrepreneurs, unfortunately, also waste a lot of money and time into something that could have been a little bit more theorized or improved before actually starting to commit to it. So there is no right or wrong, but there's just things that you can consider. Validation is also something that you don't go from product launch to scaling. This is the most difficult part, is to actually prove that there is value in there before you start to scale. So let's say you create something and your product actually sucks. The worst thing that you can do is get 100,000 people through any channel to basically come and confirm that your product sucks. So you might want to stay with a reasonable number of people and cycle through and actually make the product good before you start to scale. So this is the type of framework that I've created as part of the journey to try to capture both knowledge from my side, the knowledge from different markets and work, and then the general startup lingo that exists through different terminology, and create kind of a framework that everything else that we do in developing ecosystems is based for. To create a very simple language to kind of be able to identify where I am as a startup if I'm building something, or someone who looks for, from a support service, from investor support perspective or anything, to see kind of where you are. So in networking events you can see a lot of two people talking a lot to each other until eventually they find that actually we are talking about two different things. You're still here and you're still doing that. So startup ecosystems is something that is also, to define it a bit better, there's the idea side, the innovation side, something that is the product side. That starts from hackathons, idea competitions, R&D functions, and so forth. Then there's the entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial people, those who start all kinds of companies. Maybe they're freelancers, maybe they're designers, maybe they are, and so forth. So these are the type of two main ingredients in this setup, and these tend to lead to innovation ecosystem that is also casually mixed with startups ecosystems. And then the other side is the entrepreneurship ecosystem. So to start actually looking into developing something specific is the mix of these two worlds is that feed the startups. So it's entrepreneurial people and it's the innovation side. But after that, when they become startups, the difference is that when you look at innovation as a whole, in startups they have an owner. It's like a capsulated setup where there's the actual innovation in process to be validated, and there's team behind it, and you can actually see and measure how that progress goes. So this is kind of one way to look at to find the core element. Then the support of the development starts from need for knowledge in the earlier phase, and later phase you need resources and connections to scale. And typically the balance between private and public is kind of starting from public side or publicly funded activities and more to the private side. And from the support perspective, there's really three areas to focus on. One is to get startups created, so helping in team and ideation. The next part is to make sure that there is actually value in what's being built, and then going to growth. And this helps to find also information from many sources and focus on activities in a sensible way, because you can't go from formation to growth. So you need to pass one kind of element to get to the next one. So if we look at the typical ecosystem, it always exists. So ecosystem is not something that is controlled by anyone. It's something organic, it exists where companies are created, but then there are those kind of typical, more permanent and sustainable organizations and actors in each place that are kind of there. So the government is there, financial organizations are there, usually the higher education, R&D functions, and the big companies. And everything in between is what kind of happens, and this is the kind of, in the middle is all of the moving parts. and the types of focus in the services in different areas is kind of also to give an idea of how those should be structured. And there's two sides to focus on. There's the idea to business, and then there's the team to organization. And then it also needs to be a good balance in how these both sides are developed over time. There's then the way to type a way to build these supports. And usually then this is one of the types of things that start to happen when the ecosystem starts to emerge. Someone starts to look at, hey, it's kind of confusing, there's so many services available, so which services for what need, and there's a kind of mapping exercise that usually starts. But what is usually also missing is this one dimension of to what phase actually that service is focusing on. But the main thing is that these services come and go, and they need to exist, and then they focus on different verticals, and sometimes they are only once a year, sometimes they are, once a week, so they vary a lot. So the main thing is the information challenge and the connectivity challenge. And this is if you think about the startup ecosystems from new person's perspective, you get this weird terminology, and then you see a lot of different organizations and you try to map it out. So this is the London subway map. And you can imagine if there wouldn't be connections between those cities and you would try, or think about Tokyo where the language would be something very difficult to understand. So someone needs to build this kind of connectivity and support function to really kind of understand what the ecosystem is about. And the typical experience for someone to navigate an ecosystem is that you see these different organizations that are there and they keep popping up new ones and then some disappear and you try to figure out how to navigate that. And then from support organizations or support functions perspective, you have these customers coming to your service. You do some service to improve, whether it's mentoring, whether it's an event, whatever functions, and then they go. And those who are permanently providing that services, they have challenges to identify where did they came from and what happened after, because it takes a while for these to, and then they know there's some other services that they are partnering with, but they don't really know what's going on in that side. And there is no one journey, there's multiple journeys because it depends on business vertical and so forth. So the customer experience through these services is pretty confusing. And when we look at the digital side of how to get some digital support for this, there are a lot of different applications, being meetup apps or Eventbrite or WordPress or so forth that are being used that are not one support service can have multiple applications. Different organizations have different functions and the digital world in this so technology advanced startup ecosystems are actually pretty messed up. So a lot of applications are not even connected to communicate as well as the organizations are willing to connect and communicate with each other. So then when you look at any single ecosystem, you start to get a really big mess of applications that have no connectivity to each other whatsoever. And then when you start to think about connecting cities in a country or connecting countries' ecosystems to each other, then it gets multiplied all the time. So what we have focused on is to solve that problem from digital perspective. So what we have built together with, initially by our effort and then together with City of Helsinki, is a kind of solution like a water system or a electricity system that you build this infrastructure underneath and then you plug it in different services on top of that to start capturing the connectivity and to start providing efficiency. So there's the kind of functionalities that exist in this solution. And in simple terms, the core elements in that system is the person profile, there's the startup profile, that includes the person profiles that belong to the team members. Then you have a community element, and the community can be anything. It can be a business angel community, it can be a startup event, it can be any of these. And then you have the members in each of them. And different functions. And then the beauty starts by actually being able to run them all in the same infra to connect these different communities to each other and start building those ecosystem views that actually start to showcase the whole activities that are there. And then connecting these even further. And when you get this to data point, then you get to this level that you can start to actually measure these things. And this is the type of setup that how the information and support flows. And then you can also get to the international level to start benchmarking these different things. So in simple ways, this is the types of things that you can track through how the companies are evolving and start to find bottlenecks and gaps and what's missing and so forth. So that's it. And basically, the one thing I also want to say in regards is the way we do it. We are not the SaaS provider. We don't want to provide a solution in that way that we are in charge of this. So each country and each city that we work with, we find a way that what is the most natural ownership of this solution to be operated in their region. Because we don't want to be the Facebook, we don't want to be the owner of this data and this solution. We just want to bring the tools and the knowledge and then find the natural way in each of the place. Thank you.